Hi, so I'm so delighted today that I am with Amit Ghose to talk about intersectionality, informed leadership, to talk about living with visible differences, to talk about how to kind of make a difference in deep self-acceptance. My name's Naomi Whitehead and I'm a solution-focused practitioner, coach, interested in leadership and excited to begin. Hi Amit, and thank you so much for this invitation to come and talk with you and interview and explore some ideas around intersectionality and leadership. It's a total privilege to be here. You have completely inspired me since I encountered your work a few months ago on LinkedIn. Bought your book as soon as it was released, read it twice. I found it so healing about what it is to be human, and find all your content such an incredible... It has such depth and yet sort of playfulness and humility combined. And it's just, your messages are really accessible universally while also talking about international face equality and all the other areas. I'd love to hear from you how you, from a really kind of early age, have transmuted those moments of challenge, like what actually happens in those moments that have enabled you to kind of sort of transmute something challenging into a kind of depth of self-worth that you have now.
Well, thank you, first of all, for those kind words, Naomi, and giving me this opportunity to speak to you about a subject that's so important to me as well. To go into your question a little bit, I think it's a journey. It's not one moment that I can point at and say, this is what has helped shape that. For me, it's a journey, and it's a combination of steps. It's a combination of steps that I call the confidence code. And the very first step of that is about embracing who we are. From a very young age, I realized that I have this condition. I looked in the mirror, I saw it, I couldn't hide it. I went into school and faced challenges. Children didn't want to sit next to me. I had those moments when children would come with their parents and be like, Mummy, what happened to that man's face? And those moments were really, really difficult. But when I started embracing who I am and my hobbies, my likes, my interests, cricket, for example, was a huge part of my journey. The moment I started playing cricket, and I played cricket in front of a group of children, I went from Amit, the boy who's got a funny face, to Amit, the boy who plays cricket. And that realization that if we embrace who we are, those challenges, we can start overcoming them slightly, because people will connect with us for who we are rather than what we look like. So that was maybe the beginning of this realization and this journey that I went on.
And when you talk about the cricket and that moment and that sort of the shift in identity, and obviously both you and I are really interested in sort of the intersection of different identities and how that shape us, and that ideally, I guess I think I'm be right in speaking for you, we'd like a world where every single kind of identity is welcome in every single space, and that's signalled in multiple ways. When you were experiencing that shift and you became involved in those hobbies and started to engage in a different kind of part of yourself, what difference did it make to your relationships?
I think it made a huge difference to my relationships in a positive way, because for the very first time I could express certain things that I suppressed before. Because before I had this fear of rejection, fear that people won't want to sit next to me, talk to me, be my friend, play with me. But suddenly when I discovered that, hey, if I start talking about cricket, if I start talking about the football team I support, if I start talking about things I like doing outside of school when I get home, I can start making those connections with people, because we all have hobbies. We all have likes. We have things we enjoy. We all have things we do that shape who we are. And a lot of the times when somebody's born different, or somebody feels insecure or feels like they don't belong, they sort of hold all that back, and that affects relationships, because you're suddenly feeling insecure, you're suddenly feeling scared, you're suddenly like, I don't belong here. But you can bring your belongings into an environment where that isn't existent. So be that in school, be that in real life, be that in professional settings, when an individual comes in, they bring their identity with them. They bring their likes, their hobbies, their culture, their background, all those different sets. They bring that with them. And when you start sharing that and you explore that, one, you're teaching people about your background and what you do and where you belong. But two, you're expressing, you're opening up, and people see you differently. I always use this analogy that when I walk into a room, people see my condition, see my face for the first maybe 5-10 minutes. But then when I start talking to them, they're like, this is Amit. This is the guy who likes cricket. This is the guy who's just started a podcast or wrote a book. And suddenly they start ignoring the face and they're like, oh, it's just Amit. It's just another guy. So that's really important.
That is just wonderful what you say. You always say such profound things. When you talk about belonging, a sense of like internal belonging, and you can bring that energy into another space. And it makes me think about something that I've been reflecting on this week about how important it is for us to stay soft, even when we're feeling insecure or when we're uncertain or we're in a new situation, and that our softness and what you've just described, belonging, can then enable you to invite everybody to experience that sense of belonging, and then everybody can express themselves truly and fully. And it makes me think about what you said on one of our Zoom conversations, which just blew me away, when you said people are seeking external validation about, say, a project or an idea before the words have even left their mouth, instead of internally validating. So what would be your message to people about how to cultivate that internal validation, that sense of belonging?
It's a journey. Self-acceptance is a journey. It took me 35 years to come to a point where I could say, this is me, take it or leave it. And I don't expect anyone listening to overnight say, I accept myself. You talk about ideas and things that we have, plans that we have, and even before it's left us, where we're looking for others to accept it. You go through moments, like for me, for a very long time, I didn't accept the left-hand side of my face. I hid it. But the moment I understood that I cannot change the way I look, what I can change is my mindset, is when it started becoming a reality for me. Because there's no point in me trying to change something that I can't change. If I keep coming home every night looking in the mirror and saying, why me? Why do I look like this? No matter how much I embrace my personality, no matter how much I go out and talk about hobbies, likes, interests, I'll come home every night and I'll feel upset. And that will go into my professional life as well, because I won't bring my true self to work. We hear this term bandied around a lot, bring your true self to work. What does it really mean to bring your true self to work? What do I bring in? What do I not bring in? Where's the distinction? But even before we get to that, bringing your true self to work, we as individuals need to say, this is me, this is who I am, this is the entirety of me. My heritage, my background, my sexuality, my likes, my hobby, everything has to be, I accept, and I come into my workplace. Because if you're going to and ah around certain parts of your identity and be like, should I really be talking about that at work? Then you're not bringing your true self, and then you're not being productive, because you're tiptoeing around certain places. And that, for me, in my personal life, for a very long time, I tiptoed because I didn't accept the left-hand side of my face. I sat in a certain part of the room where people could only see the right-hand side of my face. Today, you're interviewing me. I would have sat where you're sitting because the cameras are there and people can see the right-hand side of my face. And I would have been always going like this. So rather than me talking to you fully and unapologetically, I would have been more concerned about this. But now, because I've realized that this is me, this is who I am, I'm able to give you my 100% performance. And that's what organizations need to be thinking about. That's what individuals within organizations need to be thinking about when they're thinking about their development, when they're thinking about their one-to-ones. It's not just the KPIs, it's the nuances that buried underneath that.
Yeah, absolutely. And those nuances buried underneath that is where the fresh perspectives, innovation, creativity.
Yeah.
It's where, a thriving team, a thriving organization, thriving leadership is where environments are co-created with everybody participating, where people feel safe. Yeah. And everybody experiences such a level of belonging that they feel that they can come up with anything, any idea, and they'll be welcomed for the way that they think, for the fundamental person that they are, for their kindness, their hard work, their attention to detail, not valued for anything kind of superficial or external or performative, but something with depth. And I think that's what makes thriving organisations. And there's ways that we can signal that. If you were kind of inviting leaders to think about truly like making a shift even after this conversation, an achievable shift that could create more deeply inclusive organisations on every level, what would you say?
Well, I'm going to solidify what I've just said about the truly accepting yourself and the performance by giving you this example of myself. When I learned to accept myself, when I learned to say, this is me, take it or leave it, I went from a guy who just worked in sales to now a guy who's an international keynote speaker, an author, a leader in NHS working in DEI. It happens. That shift will happen. And any organization that's looking for that, they need to understand that innovation truly comes when someone truly accepts who they are, truly appreciates who they are, because then you start bringing in ideas that, I could bring in an idea of something that happened to me in India. I could bring in an idea of something that happened to me in my culture, in my community. My mother might have said something that I can resonate back into my organization and say, actually, you know what? Even though you guys are thinking about this, have you thought about it this way? Because we always think, in an organization, we always think from the inside rather than the outside. We do things because we want to do it. We don't think what the outside is like. It's very difficult to explain what I'm trying to say, but we need to start thinking from a different perspective. And I think that's where the intersectionality piece, that's when the true self, that's when all the different facets of our identity can really come to life.
That's amazing. And when you talk about different facets of identity and this kind of expanding, when I was looking into all the work that you've done, especially recently, so with Gail Reid, that beautiful art piece in the Mall Galleries in central London, how do you think that kind of art piece and being in the world of culture in that way, what difference could that make to the things that you're saying?
Again, it comes to that innovation piece, doesn't it? If I hadn't truly unapologetically accepted who I was, I wouldn't have been in a position to open myself up to that identity, to hold a cricket ball in one hand and my eye in the other and say, look, this is me, and create such a beautiful experience, not just for myself, but the viewers, to actually admire that and say, actually, I'm going to own who I am today. I'm going to own myself. I'm going to accept myself. I'm going to go into work and be me. It starts with that piece every single time. I know I keep going back to that acceptance piece, that validation piece, that self piece, but it truly is the beginning of everything in an organization. And when a leader understands that that's what makes an organization truly thrive, that's when you'll see the real shift. It's about the human being. I want to give you an example here. My manager at my day job, I went through a difficult period in my life very recently with certain things happening in my personal life, and my performance at work had slightly gone off radar. And we sat in the meeting, and I was really, really scared going into this meeting. I was really nervous, thinking, okay, we're going to talk about KPIs now. I'm going to have to go and prove why I'm not doing well. And the meeting started with, "Hey, Hamid, how are you doing?" And I spoke about my work. I spoke about my book. I spoke about my wife. And she said, "No, Hamid, stop. How are you doing?" And that conversation completely shifted, and we didn't talk about work at all. And we spoke about what I'm going through. And the conversation ended with her saying to me, "Amit, I suggest you take a week off and recharge and then come back." And I came back and I wrote a 10,000 word report, which I submitted, and it did really well. And that's the difference. That's the difference. That's what leaders need to understand, that it's not always about KPIs. It's not always about the performance. It's about the individual, and every individual is different and is sometimes asking, "Hey, how are you?"
Absolutely. And that conversation and the invitation for you to be honest, and then your courage to be really honest, and just how you are and how authentic you are. I mean, from the minute I sort of interacted with you, you invite, like, you're just really sort of straightforward and direct and easy. Like, I instantly felt so comfortable with you, even just kind of the WhatsApps to sort out some logistics. It's just, there's a clarity to you which just feels like it comes from a place. I think so many people are trying to be something or are trying to act in a particular way depending on the context. And I just don't experience any of that with you. And also, while you're being completely and utterly genuine, you're also naturally making having a huge impact on the world, and in terms of people connecting to things that are really important, like on the website about the art, on the International Face Equality campaign. I mean, if that could go even bigger, and if people, I mean, the difference that could make to young people today, if they thought about the concept of international face equality and started to tune into their hobbies, like you mentioned earlier, what they want to say or what their values are, and became fascinated by that instead of fascinated by things that are very external.
Yeah.
It would be incredible.
Yeah, it's not about what other people are doing, it's about what we want to do. And I always say to people that go away, go home, write down your goals, write down what you want to do, write down where you see yourself in 2 years' time, and focus on those. It's about action. So my four-step confidence, the last step of that is consistent action. None of it will be possible without consistent action. I wouldn't have had my own podcast if I hadn't taken action every single day to work towards it. And that's what's very important. People will manifest a goal. People will visualize something they want to do, and they'll sit on it, and nothing will happen. And we're like, well, I tried and nothing happened. But I'm like, what did you actually do? And then they'll be like, well, and then, yeah, exactly. So go away and start thinking about what actions you can take, however small or big. It's about that 1% change every single day. 1% change. I was talking to folks here in the studio this morning, and I said, if we can have 1% improvement in every single episode, we're going to see a shift. And it's about that. It's about saying some other big goals. It's about the small steps, incremental steps.
Yeah, I love that. And that really connects to the solution-focused approach that I work with, which is inviting people to celebrate what works well already, to really visualize the manifestation of desired change, and then explore what small tangible shifts look like, so that and then trusting that bigger change flows from that naturally.
Trust is a really important thing. You've got to believe in the process. Like I've said, I want this podcast to become really big. I want it to become really successful. But after 4 or 5 episodes, if I see that my viewers or my subscribers aren't shifting, I can't just suddenly just say I'm going to give up and shelf it. It's about that trust that, you know what, if I keep following this process, it's going to work out. The example I can give here is when I left my day job, when I left my sales job to do all of this, my family were asking me, how are you going to create income from this? I said, I don't know, but all I know is I want to add value and create impact. Add value and create impact. If I keep adding value and creating impact, something will happen. And it did. I got offered a job at the NHS, the largest employer in the country. I'm now a senior diversity, inclusion, equity business partner for them. And I'm making real tangible change for the organisation through the work that I'm doing, through my lived experience. But it's that trust in the process.
Yeah, and trust is it. Yeah, and it's trusting. You trust yourself, you trust others, and you trust the process, which is that kind of like that 3-layered aspect. And again, that's something we talk about in Solution Focus that my colleague Ursula Bjorman taught me about. Trust yourself, trust the other person, trust the process. And from there, what would you like to see in a few years from now that would show you in really concrete, tangible ways that this work is really making a difference in multiple different settings? I don't know if it'd be useful to think about a particular setting as an example, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, there's a few settings that I can think about. One is, I said to myself, I don't know how relevant this is, but I said to myself when I started creating content, I'll feel as if I'm successful in the work I'm doing if I see the Oscars hosted by somebody with a visible difference.
Yes.
Then I'll see that I'm successful. And in a similar professional setting, if there is true representation from all walks of life, I went to an organisation once to do some consultancy work, and they asked me, how do I speak to someone in a wheelchair? I said, as a human being, just as another person. Just because they're in a wheelchair, you don't have to speak to them differently. And this is the thing, you don't have to be different just because someone looks different. You just treat everyone as a human being. And for me, it's about that change. It's about accepting everyone for who they are. It's about celebrating differences. We don't do enough of that. For me, and this is going to sound controversial, but still today, diversity, equity, inclusion is a tick box activity for 90% organizations out there. They're doing it to tick the box. They're not doing it for the true value that it can bring the organization. And the moment they realize that actually the innovation, the performance can truly come when we really take DEI seriously, is when the shift will happen. So for me, that is what I want to see.
Oh, I love that you give this example, in terms of somebody hosting the Oscars with a visible difference and then broadening it out to just seeing representation everywhere. And when you talk about that, it makes me think about this idea, you've talked so much about acceptance of ourselves, and then that sort of spills out to everybody else, and then it's a more thriving world. But I guess the dream also is that acceptance won't be something that people have to work on to navigate basically an ableist and discriminatory society. Acceptance will be a given, and people will be just busy working, collaborating, creating, doing what they're, because that sort of additional layer of sort of navigating unconscious bias or stereotypes or a lack of sensitivity about intersectional identities won't be happening.
I think we've got a long way to go. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of retuning to do in terms of our mind, in terms of leadership, in the way they look at this whole subject. But conversations like this and the work you're doing is definitely a beginning for that change. And
I was curious about your so something I've noticed in your content is that you have this really natural, kind of playful, dynamic energy. And I wondered if you've always been like that, or if there was a moment in your life or an experience that really ignited that sort of dynamism and playfulness.
I think I've always had this personality about get on with it. This is the reality. Let's just get on with it. I've always had that. And I think certain things have shaped this dynamic. My friends, they teased me, bullied me, treated me just like they would if I didn't have this condition, That's really important. That normalization from friends circle is really important. That, hey, let's not treat this guy differently just because he's born different. Let's just include him in our friend circle, just as everyone else. That really helped. My father really helped. The story about when my uncles said, you shouldn't let him play cricket. And my father said, well, if he wants to play cricket, he wants to play cricket. Those things really helped shape this I am who I am. And then my wife telling me to go and create content on social media, and, me creating that content and then getting that love back from my audience, that really helped. So I think a lot of it shaped it, but I've always been this is me, take it or leave it kind of person.
Yeah, it's so refreshing. And it also connects to kind of this idea about curiosity. Like, you seem to have a natural curiosity, and you're inviting curiosity in others to kind of bring a really present, exploratory approach to conversations, to kind of who we are. So, Amit, could you share with us the details of the coffee shop incident?
The coffee shop incident was, as someone born with visible difference, I'm subject to people staring, people pointing, people nudging their friends, saying, look at his face, all the time. And I was in London a few months ago, and I went into a coffee shop just to get a coffee. And I stepped up to the counter and ordered a coffee and a cake. And the lady looked at me and said, we're not serving anymore. Turned around and walked off. Clearly they were serving. I could see a bit of shock on her face as well. She just didn't want to serve me because I was different. And I stepped out of that coffee shop horrified, upset, depressed.
When there's been micro moments of injustice or discrimination in a moment, and how, for example, what happened in the coffee shop, and how you've been able to turn that into you so genuinely wanting to make a difference for others, instead of becoming angry or bitter or frustrated. Of course, there is natural frustration.
There is.
So somehow you navigate that really complex duality of releasing the frustration, the injustice, calling it out, while simultaneously going, I'm going to turn this into a gift for others. I'm going to find I'm going to find the mechanism to share these messages, to think differently, to invite us all to think differently. It feels like somehow, if am I right in noticing this, you have like such a true sense of creating more peace in the world and more equity on every level, even from your challenge.
No, thank you for describing it in that way. And I think it is really important. We do get angry, and that coffee shop incident made me angry, made me upset, made me depressed. But it's about how we channel it. That's the key, and you hit that on the head there. For me, the book that I wrote, Born Different, the reason I wrote that book, it started as a journal of my experiences in school, and then I realized that this could be a book. And the reason why it's out there in the world is because I felt as if I had that book when I was a child, it would have helped me so much. So when that coffee shop incident happened, I was like, what can I do for this to help others? And that's why I made the video, and that's why I talked about it, and that's why I went on Sky News, BBC, all the outlets to talk about it and tell the world how it made me feel, but then say, actually, I turned pain into purpose. And it's that key thing that we all go through pain in life. We all go through certain things in life. And I use this analogy, and I know you love this, and I've said this to you before, but when I go to colleges and do a talk, I say, would you date yourself? And everyone laughs and looks at each other and thinks about it. And then the reason I ask that question is, A, if you're not going to spend 2 hours with yourself, why would anyone else want to spend that time with you? But you're your biggest backer. If you're not going to back yourself, why would anyone else back you in a job interview? If you go in thinking, am I going to get this job? Am I good enough? More than likely the person interviewing is going to think the same thing. But if you go into that job interview going, this job is for me, I'm going to get this job, you're going to get that job, because that confidence, that personality is going to come across saying, I've got this, I know what I'm talking about. So that is really important. And that's why I consistently and constantly channel all my energy into this. And I think storytelling is really, really powerful, really powerful. And a lot of my LinkedIn posts are storytelling. I could have made a point just by putting that point on there, but nobody's going to connect with that. But as soon as you start with, did you know what happened to me? Or has this ever happened to you? You've got that attention from people, and that then people are reading it, and then they're resonating with it. They're connecting with it. I talk about disability or no disability. We all struggle with insecurities. We do. You know, I go into a wedding hall and I feel scared, and I put my head down and play on my phone because I don't want to talk to anybody around me. Everyone feels that way. Not just me. Just because I've got a visible difference or just because I've got a disability, I'm not the only one that feels that way. And the moment I understand that, and the moment I realize that I'm not the only one, suddenly things fall into place.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I do love that. Because when you asked that question about, well, when you told me about the story of, you know, asking people, those college students, would you date yourself? Honestly, when I meditated on that, even in that moment and then afterwards, it brought almost like a blissful sense of maybe belonging that you mentioned earlier. Like, I think that's probably what you give and bring to people. And I thought to myself, yeah, like, would I? And if I wouldn't, then I need to think about like how I'm spending my time, what I'm thinking about the kinds of people I connect with that then inspire those quieter moments when I am by myself. It sort of led to a depth of humanity that it just is so important and profound. And I'm really moved by that. And I love that you sort of find so many different ways to kind of invite people to connect to that, which connects this idea of all the stories, you know. And again, in the solution focused approach that I work with in coaching and leadership, it's all about inviting people to tell new hopeful stories and to re-narrate previous stories about who they are and the possibilities. You know, there's like a lovely example of inviting somebody to talk. They were sharing an example of how they'd been street homeless in their past as an example of what had gone wrong. And when I sort of paused, it was in a kind of therapeutic context, and I said, so you managed to exit street homelessness, just like a slight rephrase, because I was genuinely fascinated. And that person went, well, actually, I did. And they sat up and started telling this story of, actually, I'm quite resourceful. And they made a shift and told a new story. And I think you amplifying the power of stories, and I think it comes from narrative therapy, maybe, Michael, I'm not sure where this quote comes from, but the stories we tell is the life that we live. And you are telling a story that I think is inspiring people globally to tell a new story about identity and existence and enjoying life.
Yeah.
Within and challenging all the structures that might inhibit your enjoyment. The structures need to change. We don't, or you don't, or, you know, people with multiple different kind of sort of identities that they're bringing. It's the structures that need to make everything accessible.
Yeah.
So that people can just participate fully.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. The point that you made about the structures need to change, the accessibility needs to change. That's what needs to adapt. We live in a society now where things are evolving very, very quickly, and the intersectionality part, not just race, you know, not just disability, sexuality, everything needs to be considered when organizations are creating change. And EIAs are a really, really powerful tool. Often EIAs are ignored in organizations. Nobody does an equality impact assessment when they're creating change. And my boss told me a really interesting story about Dyson. Dyson hand blades hadn't actually done any EIA when they created their hand blades. And they installed these hand blades on airports around the world. And people of ethnic minority with brown skin, darker skin were going to dry their hands, and they weren't working because they created the product with only a white person's hand in mind. And the sensors around that were only adapted to only work when the technology around it was only working. And it's just a powerful story to highlight why EIAs and equality impact assessments are so important in organizations. Because every change we make can affect somebody in a way that we haven't thought of.
Yes. And it's so clear and tangible. That's how simple it is. Ask people, do the research, find out what's needed so that things are genuinely useful for all. And I think that's a really big thing. And just kind of one more thing I wanted to ask about was kind of this idea of unlearning. You know, I guess this is the beginning of people really unlearning, particularly, again, I suppose the thing I'm interested in is, you know, in leadership, how people can unlearn perhaps automatic ways of doing things and start to learn a new way of doing things, which is much more informed. And I think and another thing in solution focus is go slow to go fast. It might take time initially to do that research, to ask to collaborate with every single person that you work with. What would make this space feel like you could thrive through? You can communicate in the way that you need to, so that your neurodiversity is accommodated, so that every kind of style of thinking is supported. What can we do differently? And take that time in the initial, because longer term, things and change and productivity will all happen more quickly.
Yeah, unlearning is really powerful. And the reason why I say this is I'm a huge admirer of Simon Sinek. And Simon Sinek talks about leaders eat last. And leaders eat last is this concept of leaders staying quiet in a room and waiting for others to speak. Because if we're going to go into a room and give all our ideas and our plans, one, we've given our ideas, so everyone's going to agree to it because we're a leader. And they're going to feel like, yeah, I've got to agree with him now. But if I go into a room and say, right, okay, what should we do? We're going to hear the whole room. We're going to hear ideas. And as a leader, I may hear something that I've missed, that I haven't thought about. And it's that whole concept of saying to myself as a leader, being humble enough to say, I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers. I'm going to go and find out. Leaders have this thing about them. They'll go into a room and, yep, this is the plan. This is what we're going to do. This is the strategy. Let's go and do it. But when we just sit back and say, what should we do? Here's the problem. What's the solution? And you hear all these different ideas. And then you said it takes longer. Of course.
At the beginning.
At the beginning, it takes longer. But the actual end product that we get out of it is much more refined, much more tuned, much more in line with society.
Yeah, and usually more rapid change.
Yeah.
And when you talk about that humility, I think, you know, unlearning humility, these qualities are so important now. And I think, you know, in terms of, again, a more peaceful world, overcoming some of the horrific amounts of conflict globally, I think if people can have that humility settle into a not knowing place, stay soft when they're scared or uncertain, and still kind of be curious and kind of channel that duality, I really think we'll start to communicate better.
Yeah, I think as leaders, or leaders do need to take that step back a little bit and show the vulnerability as well. Show their vulnerability. Sometimes as leaders are scared to show their vulnerability, or show that they're vulnerable, or show that they have a weakness. but it just brings that human element of it. You know, if the leader of an organization can show that he has a disability, talk about his own intersectionality, his or her own intersectionality, I think that's going to make a big difference in that piece of people bringing themselves to work as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess, so maybe my last question then is about what would be kind of your closing words to people who want to engage with this kind of immediately and do something different even that day? And also how people navigate being a genuine ally. Yeah, that.
I think the first thing anyone who wants to go away and put some actions in places is to not do anything immediately. Go away, sit down, take a step back and look at everything. Look at your organization from a 30,000 foot high view. Look at where things are. Then try to identify gaps, hotspots that you can go and focus into, and then work your way in. I think too quickly we make a decision, we want to do this. It's not about that. Like I said, leaders eat last. Step back, look at your organization, look at where you are, look at where things are, find the hotspots, find the areas that need intervention, and then start working on it. But before we start all of that, it's the self. What am I doing? What can I do? What can I bring in? What aspects of myself do I need to really accept that I've been hiding away, that I don't bring into the organisation, that if I actually brought it in, it would make a difference?
Absolutely. Yeah, and the workshop that I'm doing in a few months that inspired me to really be fascinated by your wisdom, to meet with you and ask you about your wisdom, was this idea of the leadership of ourselves internally and how we harness our lived experiences and challenges, then the leadership, and being really accepting of ourselves and compassionate even of the things that we've done that perhaps we would never do again. And then so being compassionate then internally, then externally, making sure that every single kind of experience, we take the time to meet people, we take the time to learn with people. And then so internal, external, and then interaction. How can that influence interactions? And for one final point was about Nancy Klein. Have you come across her? She wrote a book called Time to Think, and she talks about the quality of listening. So you were saying people sort of being above an organisation and really looking at, so what, sitting back first, not acting quickly, what needs to be done. And actually she talks about having sort of catalytic listening qualities. So there's that stage, and then there's saying to people, so what do I need? And being so kind of still and allowing such spaciousness that people can really explore and say freely what they need and know that it's going to land with you as respectfully as if it was somebody that's always had historical privilege.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really important tool, that because we're too quick to go in and express what we want to express, especially in leadership roles. You know, we want to get the job done, but sometimes it's about saying, actually, no, wait, let's just hear what others have to say.